Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another installment of Out in the Woods. This is me, your friendly neighborhood host, Jacob. And this week, it's double trouble because my guest is also a friendly neighborhood host whose name just happens to be Jacob. Let me introduce you all to Jacob Ratliff. Hello, welcome.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. I've got so much coffee coursing through my
Oh,
veins.
yes.
I have 3 days off, and we're just vibing, honestly. We are just vibing out here.
Yep, I just made a fresh cup of coffee before we hopped on, so I'm ready to go.
What kind are you drinking?
You're gonna judge me, but Starbucks.
I'm not judging you at all. I'm drinking the New Orleans community, or I'm sorry,
Okay.
the New Orleans blend of community coffee. Now Starbucks is great. It's just too expensive for me. I will not judge you at all for drinking Starbucks. If I could afford, I would. So Jacob, introduce yourself to my listeners. Where are you from and what do you do?
Yeah, so as Jacob said, my name is Jacob Ratliff, and I am a marketing coach for LGBT entrepreneurs and coaches. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm originally from Charlotte. And little known fact about me is that I was actually born in Stanley County, North Carolina, which is a tiny little town that no one's ever heard of. So when people, say to me, Jacob, you don't seem Southern, aside from this Southern accent I got. It's oh yeah, no, I was born at Stanley Memorial Hospital.
I was gonna say this is a very, this is a very specific North Carolina thing. I feel like if I have any listeners in North Carolina, they're gonna be like, representing Stanley County. And for me, I'm just like, yeah, everything's a small town here in Mississippi.
Well, I want to tell you something. This is actually super interesting, and it's actually been top of mind lately. So my family moved away from Stanley County when I was like, I think 6 or 8 months old. I was an infant.
Hmm.
And since coming out, and so over the past 8 or so years, I have probably met 10 other queer people who grew up in Stanley County and are now living in either Charlotte or Asheville. It is
Mm.
just this bizarre occurrence. So we're churning out the queers over there.
I was gonna say, maybe Alex Jones was onto something. Maybe there is something in the water turning the frogs gay and the children of Stanley County, North Carolina, gay as well. I don't know. Time will
Exactly. I
tell.
think so.
Now, for the sake of vanity, Jacob, I just really wanted to know because, audience, a little backstory. Jacob's personal assistant reached out to me via email, and was like, "I represent this person. They do this. They really they heard about your show and they really love it." Which, first of all, just flattered me to all. I mean, I literally just like started shooting sunbeams out of my eyes seeing that. So I'm just really interested. Where did you hear about Out in the Woods and what kind of impact has it had on you now that you're here on my show and have to say good things?
Yeah, absolutely. All good things, of course. I will not say any of the bad things, of which there are actually none. So I think I found y'all scrolling. I was scrolling through Instagram, and the my Instagram feed, just the algorithm knows me.
Hmm.
It knows that I like queer things and that I like Southern things. And I regularly have my assistant kind of out there scouting out speaking opportunities for me.
Hmm.
And I sent her, I think it was a screenshot of something. And I was like, I think I want to be on this podcast. And she responded, she said, I don't know that that actually like makes sense for you to be on because it's not business related, much at all. And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, I want to be on this podcast. um, so I told her to reach out to you.
Oh my God. Well, I'm glad that that your assistant was willing to let you take this leap of faith because
Me
now
too.
your business is going to be completely ruined after this. No.
Yep, worth it. Absolutely worth
Absolutely.
it.
So well, I'm excited that, all of that money that I pay Mark Zuckerberg is actually paying off. I'm also glad that, I mean, this is a space for, of course, shameless self-promotion of what my guests do in their personal lives, but it's also, I'm just here to help paint a picture of you. So I'm glad that you're on here for that, which leads directly into my next question, which is, when did you know that you were different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In retrospect, obviously, everything is 2020,
Hmm.
um, in terms of perspective. So looking back, I mean, I was a gay little child. Um, oh my goodness, strutting around in my mama's heels, all that kind of, stereotypical stuff that you think of when you think of, oh, that's that queer little child. Um, but I really didn't start to realize it, in the moment until I was in, I would say, middle school.
Hmm.
I was getting bullied for being gay, and I knew that I was different, but I knew that that's not the way I was different.
Hmm.
Um, and lo and behold, as I moved into high school, I started to realize, oh, I think there's something in there.
Hmm.
Um, and I went to a summer camp the summer after my freshman year of high school. It was a creative writing camp.
Fun.
Um, and this was before I had even, you know, thought that I might actually be gay. And that there was nothing particularly queer about that creative writing camp.
Hmm.
Um, but it was a space where I had this kind of opportunity for one of the first times in my life just to show up.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and in the weeks following that camp, once I got home, I realized, no, yeah, I'm real gay.
Real gay. Like the adjective there is so strong. It's real
Real gay.
gay. Well, and that's, sometimes it takes getting out of the bubble to kind of understand yourself, getting out of the constant echoes of what everyone else is telling you, and then letting you just sit with yourself and your own thoughts to kind of realize, like, oh yeah, like I think I really do find myself to be a pole fancy. um so what was your first exposure to queer culture?
Yeah, so my first exposure to kind of queerness as a thing and as a concept,
Hmm.
um, I was really little, and we were with my parents. I was in a restaurant, and my dad saw some people that he knew,
Hmm.
um, and it was two men, and they said, "Hey, how are you doing?" They went on, and then probably 30 minutes later, once they had left the restaurant, my dad told me that, these are these two guys who, loved each other like mom and dad did. And then that was kind of it for the conversation. Um, which I think is kind of a sweet story looking back. Um,
Yeah. Touch, touching. I mean, considering some of the stories my other guests have told, very touching, very progressive.
yeah, and then I would say my first exposure to queer culture was probably, I would actually say it's probably in that writing camp that I was in.
Mm,
I said there was nothing particularly queer about it, but where there were openly gay people there,
mhm,
and there was just something about watching them interact with other people.
mhm.
This was when RuPaul's Drag Race was a brand new thing,
Right.
and so talking about that, and I was just kind of enamored, from a distance though, um, with seeing queer people interact in real life.
Yeah, I was gonna say very kind of relatable because, especially whenever I went off to art school my last 2 years of high school, there were also a good number of openly queer people. In fact, my roommate was a trans woman, which she had not come out as trans. God rest your soul, Aaron. But had not come out as trans at that point yet. But she still was dressing just glamorously androgynous, beautiful
Mhm.
stuff all over. And I was completely enamored. But at the time, I was so ingrained in the church lifestyle that I had been living before I went to art school that it was very painful, because it was like, I see this, but I see all of this happiness and all of this, just defiance of everything around us, and I love it, and I love that happiness. But in my brain I was like, but I can never have that. I could, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
I could never be that or have that. And now, here we are. um so what was your experience growing up queer in the Bible Belt? Once again, your family, for all intents and purposes, at least in that little interaction, that first little glimmer, sounds very progressive. Did you grow up in a religious household?
Awesome. I've been holding on to this one bombshell that I'm excited to drop
Mm.
um, with this question, which is I did. I actually grew up with a Presbyterian minister for a dad. I am a preacher's kid. Um, and if you're listening, you can't see the look on other Jacob's face right now, but it is just this look of shock and surprise. I just needed to tell you about it because you can't see it here. Yeah, my dad is a preacher, still is to this day, and one of the really amazing things has been well before I came out, kind of like that instance I talked about a second ago. There was always this kind of piece where he always made sure that I understood that being gay is okay.
Hmm.
Like it was a conversation that we actually had. Now, obviously, at that point, I was kind of, like, okay, whatever, dad, thanks, I got it,
Uh-huh.
because I
Uh-huh.
was still like, oh, I'm not gay. Um, and when I came out, it turns out he had no idea that I was gay. He hadn't really suspected it. Now, my mom knew, she knew right off the bat, but so he didn't even have a suspicion, but was still having that conversation with me.
Well, oh my God. That's incredible. I mean, you know, wow. Once again, like that's just so multi-layered, I guess. Like Presbyterian, preacher's son, very progressive preacher that's just trying to impart like the spirit of love onto their child without even understanding that they're very like, well, rather, I guess, completely missing all of like the red flags.
Right?
Or all of the rainbow flags, I should say.
Yeah.
But of course your mother knew. Moms always
Yeah.
know. They always know. um that's really fantastic. Now, of course, once again, you talked about in middle school how you were kind of bullied, for being different. So at least I guess you could find solace at home.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And looking back, I don't even remember if I ever communicated to my parents that that's what I was being bullied for, that I was being bullied because someone thought I was gay.
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever told my parents that because I was probably just too ashamed of that piece of it still.
Right. Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, okay, other than your parents, though, I guess, did you understand that there was something taboo about being queer? Did you understand that, like, I guess, once again, in the culture of the Bible Belt, that was still something that was considered a sin, you know?
Absolutely. Um, the schools I went to in middle and high school were fairly conservative, wealthy, um, white schools where most of the social circles were not dictated, but heavily influenced by church community. Uh,
Oh.
you had the people who went to Myers Park Baptist, you had the people who went to Myers Park Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
It was still very influenced by church community.
Hmm. So incredible. I mean, also kind of relatable because, there was okay, and listeners, if you're from outside of the South, I just want you to understand something that just is so weirdly specific to Southern culture, but like I would always, sometimes growing up, I wish that my parents and I went to a different church so that I could hang out with my friends at church instead of the people that I actually went to church with. And that just, it's such a weird thing, but it's a very real thing in Southern Christian culture. I don't know, because it's socially ingrained, it's like the social hub of a lot of Southern towns.
It really is. I remember this one particular experience where I had there was someone at my school who was talking about his church that he went to. And I can't remember the name of the church, but I went home and I was like, "Hey, Dad, I think I want to try going to this church." And he looked at me and he was like, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that they believe, the things that we believe in this family."
Hmm.
And which I was kind of like, they might not believe what you believe. But what I realize now is that he was actually really protecting me from a
Yeah.
really dangerous situation that could have done a lot of damage to me.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And once again, like, good on your dad for once again, like, not even realizing that you were gay and still trying to protect you from hate speech and, really, really bad psychological effects of church overreach, I guess the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Um, so now that we have this view, where did entrepreneurship come into the mix?
Um, wow, how much time do we have? One thing that's always been really interesting for me, now that we're in this conversation about, childhood and growing up, um, is that I've actually really always had this entrepreneurial bend to me.
Mhm.
Um, if you ask my parents when I became an entrepreneur, they would say that I was probably 4 or 5 years old with a trash bag of mulch sitting on the front porch selling it, with a big sign that says "for sale, mulch, price free,"
Oh
um,
my God.
which is just a cute story. But so I've always actually had, entrepreneurial projects throughout my
Mhm.
whole life.
Mhm.
Um, and when I was in college, I had a really great job that ended up turning into a full-time position, um, marketing for a small business. And I was in this position. I was making a salary, which, if you're in Asheville, fresh out of college, first of all, if you're in Asheville and you have a salaried position, you're doing pretty well.
Mhm.
But if you're in Asheville, fresh out of college with a full time salary position, it's unheard of.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I was just showing up every day, just so unthrilled with life.
Mhm.
And what I kind of started to realize is, one, I'm not the type of person that can work for someone else. I was a great employee,
Mhm.
but I was just not happy, doing that. And part of that was that I wasn't really able to show up fully as myself. Now, I was out at work. Customers of the company knew that I was,
Mhm.
queer. I wouldn't hide it if it came up. But there was a piece around it where I didn't feel like I was showing up authentically myself. And honestly, entrepreneurship was the answer for that. It was this opportunity to take such a radical departure from from the norm, so to speak. And if we talk about queerness as a deviation from the norm or something that is different, um, entrepreneurship is pretty queer in that regard. And so, a queer person doing queer things, might as well start my own business.
Makes total sense. I mean, I guess, working within the framework. of everything, grabbing this capitalist system by the balls and bravely declaring, I am my own boss. I mean, isn't that ultimately like every person's dream, like to be their own boss in a way? Once again, within the confines of the system that we have in place, but also because, like, once again, you felt, I mean, you were out at work, but you didn't feel like you could fully be yourself. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm lucky at my job that I generally feel that way. Now, of course, I'm in the service industry, so generally speaking, around my coworkers and everything like that, I'm perfectly okay with who I am. And I'm of the mind that if you can't ride this bus, then get the fuck off. So
Yeah, and the thing for me is I don't want to code switch. And it's
yeah,
not just that I don't want to, it's that it actually, code switching affects us.
it does.
And it's not in a good way necessarily. So, being in a space where I can, have on all my social profiles just Jacob the flaming homosexual,
Right.
still make money is
Yes.
is pretty radical. And then, you said something about the, within the confines of this capitalist system. And it's one thing to, say, fuck you, I'm gonna, be my own boss, be an entrepreneur. And it's an entirely different thing to say, fuck you, I'm gonna be my own boss, my own entrepreneur, and I'm gonna make a difference in the world.
Yes.
And
Well,
that's the thing that's so core for me.
I was going to say, well, yeah, because a lot of the times, too, whenever people become their own boss, they kind of throw everybody else like to the wayside because they're like, no, this is for me to make all of my own money and fuck everybody else. But for
Mhm.
you specifically, you're actually trying to empower everybody and try to encourage everybody to be able to reach their own kind of earning potential and then spread that kind of message across a broad spectrum to kind of get people to prosper in a way, I guess. So
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's all about.
um but we will discuss that further right after this short break. And we're back with Jacob Ratliff, entrepreneur and motivator extraordinaire. um So, Jacob, we were just talking about how, from the get-go, you've always kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit about you, and you just don't like being caged. You like being your own boss. But here's the thing, you went from being a salaried employee to, an enigmatic moneymaker. What's the in between? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of an interesting story. Part of it was sheer accident.
Mm,
So when I was working full-time job in marketing, a friend who owns his own business texted me one day and said he needed some marketing help. And he knows that I'm busy, have a full-time job, but would I consider a little freelance gig on the side? And of course, I said yes. And that kind of started the snowball in that I started getting out once I was doing some freelance work for him. I was like, I kind of like this.
hmm
And I started, putting some feelers out there for, what people in my network needed and started putting together a website and packages and stuff for that. And this was all while working that full-time job. And
hmm
within about 3 months, I was at capacity. I was at a full client panel
hmm
where I was working 40 hours a week at my full-time job and 40 hours a week on nights and weekends. So I was crazy, crazy busy.
Oh God.
And I finally took the leap. And then I said, all right, I'm going to quit this job. I'm going to go all in. And several months later, about 6 months later, I'd say, kind of the newness of having my own business started to wear off,
hmm
which meant that I had to start working for things actually. So whereas in the beginning it felt like clients were just falling and falling into my lap, suddenly it was okay, now I need to actually get serious about growing this business. I've been kind of, just chilling,
hmm
doing the work for the clients that are coming to me. But if I want to make more money, if I want to work with more clients, I actually need to get serious.
Mm-hmm.
So I started this kind of long process of figuring out what the types of work were that I was really passionate about, that I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed. And what came out of that was, okay, I'm moving into coaching and consulting rather than just kind of doing freelance marketing stuff, building websites, landing pages, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working one-to-one with clients in that coaching capacity, and discovered that that's what I really, really loved. And that's still kind of what I'm doing to this day, although that's
Mm-hmm.
continued to evolve a lot. Um, so, while at the beginning I did have this kind of influx of massive success,
Mm-hmm.
once that kind of started to even out, I really had to double down and get serious about how I'm
Mm-hmm.
attracting new clients. And from there, how am I going to continue attracting new clients and also have that revenue be on an upward trend rather than just flatlining?
Right, right. I mean, I guess because of the nature of the business, it kind of requires that you always have fresh, new clients all the time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Because eventually they're not gonna, if you're doing your job right, they're not gonna need your coaching anymore.
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so what are some misconceptions that people have about your specific business?
I love this is a really good question because one of the things about being a marketing coach
Mm-hmm.
is that it's a really, really saturated market,
Mm-hmm.
and about 75% of that market is, for lack of a better term, con artists.
Mm-hmm.
People who want to get you in their program, get you as a client, and kind of give you cookie cutter marketing strategies that aren't necessarily what you need,
Mm-hmm.
and aren't necessarily strategies that align with your values as a person, as a business owner.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the huge misconceptions is that I'm one of those 75%. And the reality is that almost everyone I work with has previously been burned or had a bad experience with a coach who didn't know what they were doing, a
Mm-hmm.
coach who focused on scaling and making more money rather than actually helping their clients get results.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the most common things that happens is you're working, you're working with a client one on one, they get great results. So naturally, what happens in this industry is you try to scale and say, okay, I'm not going to do one-to-one coaching anymore. I'm just going to do group coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And then, your clients still are getting pretty good results in that group coaching program. But then suddenly the groups are not like 10 people anymore. They're like 100 people.
Yeah.
And, but you're still charging the same, say $10,000 for the program that you were with the one-to-one.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh God, yeah.
so these coaches, these people are making so much money. They're making millions and millions of dollars, but their clients are not getting the results that they need to be getting, and that's what's leading to a lot of these people, getting burned.
Well, and I recently have noticed there's this trend, MLMs, which audience, if you don't know what MLMs are, what are you doing in 2021? But second of all, MLMs, it's multi-level marketing schemes, basically pyramid schemes. Um, and now there is a trend in certain MLM circles of actually like business coaching MLMs or motivational speaking MLMs,
Yep.
where, basically there's the upline that sells these packets that will train you how to be a motivational speaker. You get these clients to it basically it just trickles down to the point where like you're paying somebody else money to teach you how to be a coach to motivate people to try to convince them to spend money on you coaching them.
Hmm.
And
And
yeah.
that's happening kind of formally in these, MLM companies, but it's also happening informally with these coaches who coach coaches who coach coaches who coach coaches, and so on down the line. And yeah, I coach coaches, but I don't coach coaches who coach coaches.
Exactly. You are the master coach here.
Pretty much.
And um so how do you think queerness can be used as an asset or a leg up from a business standpoint? Because that's something that your assistant made sure to emphasize in her email. And actually, not gonna lie, I peeped your LinkedIn profile, and I did read where, part of the strategy is, using your authenticity to help build your client list. So how can our queerness be used as an asset?
Yeah. So in the process of growing my business, I've noticed one really, really important thing, which is that for a long time, I leaned away from my queerness when it came to business.
Mm-hmm.
And this felt really inauthentic for me because, if you look at my friend group, if you look at the people I surround myself with,
Mm-hmm.
I live a pretty queer life, but I wasn't showing up that way when it came to my business.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started to make this conscious shift into leaning into my queerness,
Mm-hmm.
things started falling into place and working like they never had before. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that happened.
Tell me why.
I will do it right now. Because the first thing is there's this piece of vulnerability I'm showing. Here is this, actually kind of intimate part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sharing that with you shamelessly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's simultaneously showing this vulnerability and confidence. And people love that shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want to work with people they can relate to and people who are confident.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, it helped me start attracting the types of clients that I wanted to work with. So before I started leaning into this queerness, I was having a lot of calls with prospects who were an awful, awful fit. Conservative, straight white dude, times 100, it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taking them as clients because I didn't have the alternative was not having the clients.
Yeah.
And I knew going in that I didn't want to work with them. And it meant that when I did work with them, it was miserable. I hated it. But once I started, publicly leaning into my queer identity, suddenly I wasn't getting those people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting instead the people who I can relate to and who really want to talk to me. And my general rule is that I don't work with anyone who I wouldn't be perfectly happy to go grab a beer with on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That's my rule about bringing on clients. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I weren't showing up authentically, because I wouldn't grab a beer on a Saturday with someone who doesn't know I'm gay or who, I can't be my big old queer self around.
Absolutely. Well, and that is what is part of how rewarding, what you do is. And, you want to keep loving what you do. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, you want to keep loving what you do so that you can continue having the motivation to keep going. And if you just start, for lack of a better term, whoring yourself out just for the sake of having money, it does become grating, and eventually you lose your love for it, and eventually it falls to the wayside and you feel like you have to find something else.
And that's the point that's exactly what I was experiencing when I was at this point where I was attracting a lot of people that I didn't want to work with. Is I started to hate my business.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the point where I realized, okay, something has got to change.
But I also know that another part of the reason though that that you felt like you had to take on clients that you didn't necessarily like was because you weren't I feel like there's like an uncertainty about the market for queer specific people, and which of course I know that not all of your clients are queer.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it is a little shaky, especially in the Southeast, where it's like, well, I don't know how far, you know, queer specific or queer leaning or, queer a lot allied, clients specifically can take me, because how many are there really out here?
A
Um,
ton.
I was gonna
So
say,
many.
and that's the thing. You obviously, I feel like that was a little bit of a leap of faith for
It
you, and it
was.
obviously paid off.
Yeah. The majority of clients I attract are either queer, and if they're not queer, they're women.
Hmm.
Um, which perfect,
Right.
right? I'm trying to think, I don't have a single straight white male client right now. And I'm happier than I've ever been.
Doesn't that just say a lot, though? Doesn't that just say a lot? But we are pressed for time, so we can't dive into that. But it speaks for itself. That's all. That's all I'm gonna say. It speaks for itself. Um, so why do you think it's so important for people in the queer community to focus on starting businesses?
I think if I think it's only important for queer people to start a business if they have that drive to,
Hmm.
honestly.
Hmm.
Because I've spoken with a lot of people who think they should start a business, but and it's not that they don't have what it takes,
Hmm.
is that they don't know that the payoff is going to be worth it.
Hmm.
Because when you're starting a business, it's not just about providing a product or a service.
Hmm.
It Because if you just do that, you're not really creating a business. What it takes to create a business is to be able to envision something larger than yourself,
Hmm.
to envision creating something larger than yourself. And it's if you have that vision, then you don't just owe it to yourself, but you owe it to the people whose lives you can impact.
Hmm.
One of my really huge commitments is to help queer people share their gifts with the world.
Hmm.
And that's really what this is ultimately when we're talking about starting a business,
Hmm.
is finding that empowerment to maybe figure out what those gifts are, but then once you've done that, to figure out how to share them.
Hmm.
And statistically, right, there's not enough queer entrepreneurs in the world.
Yeah.
um so we need more of them, obviously, but not just for representation. Representation is important, but it's not everything. If we're also thinking really deeply about, if we look at all the businesses that we're surrounded with, most of them are run by straight white men.
Hmm.
And that means that straight white men have the majority of the economy in their pocket. And this
Hmm.
is something we all know. This
Hmm.
isn't a surprise. And for queer people in particular, it's about showing up and claiming our place at the entrepreneurship table.
Hmm.
Um, that in and of itself is a really radical act.
Hmm.
So, to answer your question even more specifically, I don't know that I would say it's important for all queer people to start a business,
Hmm.
but I think it's important for those who have that vision.
Hmm.
They owe it to themselves and to the people that they want to help.
Right. And, honestly, I feel like that also extends to queer people from all walks of life too.
And I do think it's important to mention that when we're talking about entrepreneurship, it's impossible to talk about it without the level of privilege
Hmm.
that's associated with it. So there's this study, I can't remember, I think it was by the Harvard Business Review, um, that found that people from higher income families are likelier to be entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
And one of the things they posited in here was that it's because they were smarter.
No.
Right? Like, what the fuck?
Oh.
But that's the thing, is that it's about starting a business is about risk.
Hmm.
It At the end of the day, it's about risk. If I hadn't known at the end of the day that I would be able to fall back on my family
Hmm.
or on my partner, I don't know that I would have made the same decision.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's the huge piece here, is that, if you don't have a full-time salaried position, or if you don't have, things to fall back on, the idea of starting a business seems like something only, rich privileged people can do.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I think that's pretty fucked up, which is why it's so important not just to empower, the people who can invest in a marketing coach, or the people who can afford to take risk, but rather also to focus on empowering people who, the idea of making $10,000 in a month, sounds like something that'll never happen for them.
Hmm. Um, where do you want to see yourself in the future?
I think I envision myself doing something very similar to what I'm doing now, in all honesty. I'm sure that it will evolve, and it should continue to evolve. Maybe, the way that I work with my clients doesn't look exactly the same,
Hmm.
but this is something that I envision doing my entire career.
Hmm.
And honestly, I feel so lucky to be in my early 20s and to say that with a fair level of conviction,
Hmm.
because that's not the case for most people.
Correct. Listen to Southern Sweet Tea episode 4, audience, if you want the real tea on the early 20s career blues. But yeah, no, I mean, once again, what you're doing is really fantastic, and I super duper admire that. Once again, what you're doing, even though you're making quite a killing on it, what you're doing is also specifically to help empower people and really help other people build themselves up in a way that uh we were talking about the system earlier, and it's kind of like, you know, beating the system in its own game, I guess
Yeah.
is the best way
And,
to say it.
you know, from this episode, it makes me sound like my life is, so great. I have it all figured out.
Hmm.
And honestly, one of the pieces of entrepreneurship is there are still days that I just want to curl up in a corner and cry.
Hmm.
Like, it is such a real thing. I like this journey of entrepreneurship is just an emotional roller coaster.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the other thing, is that it's not just about, getting clients or making money. It's about how you do all that while you're taking care of yourself. And
Yeah.
that's been the biggest lesson for me over the past few months in particular.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in like putting down a schedule for this episode, you were like, well, not to sound rude, but like I need this specific time because I'm going to be decompressing now. And I'm like, no, like I totally understand that. Whenever you have to be on, you know what I mean, all day, and you're constantly on somebody else's time, or I guess having people on your time. Either way, whenever you're on a strict schedule and you have to devote your energy according to that strict schedule, I imagine that it can be taxing
Yeah, and
after a
I'm a
while.
hardcore introvert too.
Mm.
That's the thing. So, by the end of the day, if I have back-to-back things, at the end of the day, my eyes are crossing and I just want to go watch Netflix.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so Jacob, if you could go back in time and give your childhood self any words of comfort or wisdom, what would they be?
I think it might sound a little bit trite or cliched, but I think I would tell myself, show up confidently as yourself. Just do it. Because I like to think childhood Jacob, hearing it from adult Jacob, might actually pay attention.
Mm. tried and cliched. No, not really. Especially once again with your situation growing up with your family, you know. I mean, they're kind of like giving you every opportunity. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
right?
they're literally baiting you. But yeah. Well, other Jacob, it was fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time once again out of your very busy schedule to come be here with me out in these woods. Now, of course, before we go, do you have any shout outs, promos, or philanthropic opportunities that my audience should know about?
Yeah, so if you're an LGBT or even straights are okay too, I guess, coach or entrepreneur who's maybe interested in starting or growing your own business, or maybe you just want to chat with me, hit me up at jacobratliff.com. Really always wanting to connect with fellow queers and, like I said, straights too, I guess. Um, so yeah, it's jacobratliff.com.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, Jacob, you have a fantastic day. Thank you for coming out in the woods. And hopefully, maybe we can get you in another day, maybe for a sweet tea episode. I don't know. I feel like you would be fun to shoot the shit with.
Yeah, well, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.